They called Earth a backwater, a death world unworthy of respect. To them, our jungles were nothing but wilderness, something to laugh at. But they didn't understand. Our jungles don't forgive. Every vine, every insect, every shadow hides something waiting to kill the careless. When they marched into the green abyss, they thought they were the hunters. What they found instead were ghosts. Human special forces, trained by the deadliest planet in the galaxy, watching from the shadows. And in that silence, the jungle itself chose its side. Humanity's. The Stranded Explorer. The twin suns of Xerion Prime burned like angry eyes in the copper sky, casting harsh shadows across the endless desert. Captain Sarah Chen's exploration vessel, the Meridian, lay scattered across the dunes in twisted metal fragments. Emergency systems beeped weakly before falling silent one by one. Sarah dragged herself from the wreckage, her environmental suit torn and her left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The crash had destroyed her communications array, her medical supplies, and worst of all, her water recycling system. On this barren world, that meant death within days. She activated her emergency beacon, knowing it was probably useless. The nearest human outpost was 3 sectors away. Even if they detected her signal, rescue would take weeks. She had maybe 4 days of water left in her suit's reserves. The desert wind howled across the dunes, carrying with it a sound that made Sarah's blood freeze. It was a hunting call, deep and resonant. Unlike anything in Earth's databases, something was tracking her. 3 figures crested a nearby dune, moving with predatory grace. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with lean, powerful frames covered in natural armor plating. Their faces were angular, almost reptilian, with eyes that glowed amber in the harsh sunlight. The Kythera, Sarah realized, the planet's dominant species. From her xenobiology briefings, she knew the Kythera were a warrior culture. They viewed outsiders as threats to be eliminated. Her hand moved to her sidearm, knowing it would be useless against 3 trained hunters. The lead Kythera raised a weapon that crackled with energy. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of Earth's blue skies and the family she'd never see again. Instead of the expected blast, she heard voices speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Kythera. An argument was taking place. The leader seemed insistent, pointing his weapon at Sarah repeatedly, but one of the others, younger by his markings, kept stepping between them. This one's armor bore different symbols, medical rather than military. The debate grew heated. The young Kythera knelt beside Sarah, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examined her injuries. He spoke to her in broken standard, his voice like gravel mixed with wind chimes. You, dying, sun sickness, bone break, water loss. He touched her torn suit. Help, maybe. The leader hissed something that sounded like a curse and stalked away. The other Kythera followed, but not before giving the young healer a look that promised consequences. Sarah found herself alone with her unlikely rescuer. He introduced himself as Zektar, a healer among his people. According to Kythera law, outsiders were to be killed on sight. But according to his healer's oath, all suffering must be eased. Why? Sarah whispered as he fashioned a crude splint for her leg. Why risk your life for me? Zektar paused in his work, his amber eyes meeting hers. Life is sacred. Even outsider life. Law says kill, but heart says heal. Heart is louder. He carried her to a hidden cave system that honeycombed the nearby cliffs. The caves were cool and filled with the sound of dripping water. Ancient Kythera symbols covered the walls, and pools of sweet, clean water reflected the light from phosphorescent crystals. Over the following days, Zektar tended to Sarah's injuries with remarkable skill. He used local plants and minerals to create healing compounds that worked better than many human medicines. Her broken leg mended cleanly, and the radiation poisoning from her damaged suit began to clear. As her strength returned, Sarah learned about Kythera society. They were a proud people, descended from desert predators who had learned to work together for survival. Their warrior culture prized strength and honor above all else, but Zektar was different. He belonged to an ancient caste of healers who remembered older ways. My people forget, he told her one evening as they shared a meal of roasted root vegetables. Long ago, Kythera were not warriors first. We were survivors. We helped each other. Now, pride makes us see enemies everywhere. Sarah shared stories of Earth, of humanity's own struggles and triumphs. She told him about doctors who worked in war zones, teachers who refused to abandon their students, and ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply because it was right. Your species sounds much like old Kythera, Zektar mused. Perhaps that is why I help you. I see in you what we once were. On the 7th day, as Sarah's beacon finally received a response from a passing human patrol, she made Zektar a promise that would echo across the decades. "I will never forget what you've done," she said, grasping his clawed hand. "Humans pay their debts. Someday, somehow, we will repay this kindness." Zektar's laugh was like wind through canyon stones. "Small human, what could your people possibly do for mine? We are few and scattered. Your people are far away. Some debts cannot be repaid." Sarah smiled, her eyes holding a determination that made the Kythera healer step back in surprise. "Never underestimate a human with a debt to pay. We have long memories and longer reaches than you might think." As the rescue ships descended from the copper sky, Sarah took one last look at the caves that had been her sanctuary. She was leaving this world, but part of her would always remain here, and someday, when the Kythera needed humanity most, that connection would prove to be their salvation. An unlikely bond. The weeks that followed Sarah's rescue became the most meaningful of Zektar's life. He had expected punishment for helping the human, but instead found himself curious about the strange creature he had saved. Sarah's emergency beacon had been destroyed in the crash, but her personal data pad contained information that would change everything. While waiting for rescue, Sarah had noticed something troubling in Zektar's cave. The healer spent hours grinding medicinal herbs for what he called the wasting sickness that affected Kythera young. 1 in every 3 hatchlings died within their first season, their bodies unable to process the nutrients in their food. "Show me the sick ones," Sarah had asked, her medical training from years of deep space exploration kicking in. Zektar had been reluctant at first. Outsiders were forbidden from seeing Kythera weakness, but Sarah's gentle persistence and genuine concern broke down his defenses. He led her deeper into the cave system, where a hidden chamber housed 12 young Kythera, all showing signs of severe malnutrition despite adequate food supplies. Sarah's datapad contained extensive biological analysis tools. She quickly identified the problem. The young Kythera were missing a crucial enzyme that helped break down certain proteins. It was a genetic deficiency that Earth scientists had solved centuries ago. "This is treatable," she told Zektar excitedly. "On Earth, we had similar problems. There are plants in my emergency supplies that contain the missing enzyme." Working together, they created a treatment using Sarah's remaining botanical samples. The enzyme from earth plants, when properly processed, could supplement what the young Kythera lacked. Within days, the sick hatchlings began showing improvement. Word of the miracle spread quietly through Zektar's clan. Other healers came to learn the new treatment, sworn to secrecy about its origin. Sarah taught them how to identify earth plants that might grow on Zerion Prime and how to process them correctly. The clan's elder, Thakmor, was a gnarled warrior who had lost 3 grandchildren to the wasting sickness. When he saw his youngest granddaughter running and playing for the first time in months, tears flowed down his scaled cheeks. "The outsider brought this healing?" he asked Zektar. "She saw our pain and could not ignore it," Zektar replied. "Even knowing we would kill her kind on sight, she chose to help." Thakmor studied Sarah with ancient, wise eyes. "Perhaps our laws about outsiders need reconsidering, at least for this one." Sarah spent her remaining time teaching Zektar everything she could about basic medicine, nutrition, and plant cultivation. She left detailed notes in both standard and phonetic Kythera script. Most importantly, she left seeds from earth plants that could potentially grow in Zerion Prime's harsh soil. "Your people's fear of outsiders comes from survival," she told Zektar on her last night. "But sometimes, survival means accepting help from unexpected places." When the human rescue ships finally arrived, Sarah kept her promise to leave only minimal traces of her presence. But she also left Zektar with a communication device, carefully hidden and programmed to transmit on frequencies the Kythera didn't monitor. "If your people ever face extinction," she said, "use this. Humans never forget their friends." Zektar watched the ships disappear into the star-filled night. In his clawed hands, he held seeds from a distant world and knowledge that would save countless Kythera lives. But more than that, he held hope that somewhere in the vast galaxy, there were others who understood that kindness transcended species. Years passed. The treatment for the wasting sickness spread quietly among Kythera healers. Infant mortality dropped dramatically, but the cure's origin remained a closely guarded secret. Zektar's clan prospered and grew, but they never forgot the human who had changed everything. The rescue and departure Captain Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the rescue vessel Aurora, watching Xerion Prime shrink to a point of light. Her injuries had healed completely thanks to Zektar's care, but the real healing had happened in her heart. She had arrived on this world as an explorer seeking new knowledge. She was leaving as someone who understood that the greatest discoveries often happen when you stopped looking for them. Commander Price, the rescue mission leader, reviewed her report with growing concern. "You're telling me you revealed human medical technology to a hostile species? Captain, that's a direct violation of first contact protocols." Sarah remained calm. "I saved children's lives, Commander. If that's a violation, then our protocols need revision. The Kythera have been firing on our survey ships for decades. They see us as invaders. Maybe because we keep treating them like potential enemies instead of potential friends," Sarah replied. "I spent weeks with them. They're not monsters. They're a proud people trying to survive on a harsh world." Her report sparked debates at the highest levels of human government. Some called for her court-martial. Others nominated her for the Humanitarian Service Cross. In the end, pragmatism won. Sarah's medical contributions to the Kythera had created an opportunity for future diplomacy, even if current relations remained tense. Admiral Rebecca Torres, head of the Exploration Division, called Sarah into her office months after the rescue. "I've read every word of your report a dozen times. What you did down there, it was either brilliant diplomacy or spectacular insubordination." "Maybe both," Sarah admitted. "The Kythera are still shooting at our ships, but we've detected increased agricultural activity on Xerion Prime. Infant mortality seems to be dropping across several clans. Your little medical intervention is spreading." Torres leaned back in her chair. "I'm promoting you to commander and putting you in charge of the Xerion Prime monitoring station. If the Kythera ever decide they want to talk, you'll be ready." Sarah accepted the assignment gladly. She established a small research outpost 3 systems away from Xerion Prime, close enough to monitor communications but far enough to avoid provoking conflict. She waited and watched, occasionally receiving brief transmissions from Zektar's hidden communicator. The messages were simple: "Healers grow strong, young ones live, remember human kindness." 20 years passed like seasons on a distant world. Sarah rose through the ranks, eventually becoming Admiral Chen of the Deep Space Medical Corps. She never forgot her promise to Zektar, and she made sure humanity didn't forget either. Her story became required reading at the Academy, not as an example of protocol violation, but as proof that sometimes the greatest diplomatic victories came from simple human decency. The monitoring station detected gradual changes in Kythera society. Agricultural output increased. Population centers expanded. The warrior culture began incorporating more healers into their leadership structures. What Sarah had started with a handful of seeds and some medical knowledge was reshaping an entire civilization. But she also detected troubling signs from deeper in the galaxy. Long-range sensors picked up massive fleet movements in the Outer Rim. The Vorthon Dominion, a militaristic empire that had conquered 17 species, was expanding again. Sarah's staff dismissed the threat. The Vorthons are 3 sectors away from Kythera space. Even if they expand, it would take decades to reach Xerion Prime. Sarah wasn't so sure. She had studied the Vorthon expansion patterns. They didn't conquer gradually. They found isolated species and overwhelmed them with massive, coordinated strikes. The Kythera, scattered across multiple worlds with no unified government, would be perfect targets. She increased monitoring of both Vorthon and Kythera communications. Late at night in her quarters, she would study star charts and fleet positions, running scenarios in her head. If the Vorthons did attack, the Kythera wouldn't stand a chance. But she had made a promise in a cave on Xerion Prime. Humans paid their debts, and Sarah Chen had never broken a promise in her life. 20 years later, the invasion. The attack came without warning. Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing quarterly reports when Lieutenant Morrison burst into her office, face pale with urgency. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately. We're receiving massive distress signals from Kythera space." The tactical display showed Sarah's worst fears realized. The Vorthon Dominion had launched a full-scale invasion of the Kythera worlds. 300 warships, supported by orbital bombardment platforms and atmospheric processors designed to strip planets of their ability to support life. "How many Kythera worlds?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. 7 systems under attack simultaneously. The Vorthons aren't taking prisoners, Admiral. They're committing genocide. Sarah studied the tactical data with growing horror. The Vorthon strategy was brutally efficient. They had studied Kythera society and knew exactly how to break them. The scattered clans couldn't coordinate a unified defense. Each world was fighting alone against overwhelming odds. On Zerion Prime, Zektar stood atop the ancient healing caves, watching the sky burn. Vorthon ships rained death from orbit while landing craft disgorged armies of mechanical soldiers. These weren't conquerors looking for slaves or resources. They were exterminators. His communication device, hidden for 20 years, crackled to life. Sarah's voice, older but unmistakable, reached across the void. Zektar, this is Admiral Chen. We're tracking the invasion. Hold on. Help is coming. The old Cathera healer, now a clan elder himself, activated the device with clawed hands that shook slightly. Sarah, friend, you cannot help. Too many enemies, too strong. We die with honor. No, Sarah's voice carried absolute conviction. I made you a promise. Humans keep their promises. Around Zektar, younger Cathera warriors prepared for their final battle. They had heard stories of the human who once walked among them, who had saved their children and taught their healers. Many had dismissed it as myth. Now, as death fell from the sky, they wondered if myths might yet save them. The Vorthan commander, General Krexvol, observed the slaughter from his flagship with satisfaction. The Cathera were fighting bravely but uselessly. Their projectile weapons couldn't penetrate Vorthon armor. Their scattered resistance was being crushed systematically. How long until complete pacification? He asked his tactical officer. 72 hours for all 7 systems, General. The Cathera lack orbital defenses and unified command structure. This is proceeding more smoothly than our conquest of the Zelkari. Krexvol nodded. The Cathera would be the 18th species added to the Dominion's list of extinct civilizations. They showed spirit, but spirit without technology was merely entertainment for Vorthon troops. That's when the sensors detected something that made the General's blood chill. Massive hyperspace signatures were appearing at the edge of the system. Not 1 or 2 ships, but dozens, then hundreds. Identification? Krexvol barked. Unknown configuration, sir. Wait, we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. The main screen flickered to life, showing a human face that Krexvol didn't recognize. Admiral Sarah Chen looked directly into the camera with eyes that held the cold fire of absolute determination. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Human Defense Force. You are attacking a species under human protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Krexvol laughed harshly. Humans, we have files on your species. You're explorers and traders, not warriors. You have perhaps 50 warships in your entire fleet. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. You might want to update those files. The sensor readings told a story that Krexvol couldn't believe. 300 human ships had dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Not just warships, but support vessels, medical frigates, and craft of unknown design. It was the largest human fleet ever assembled. This is impossible, the general whispered. Intelligence reports show humans are peaceful. You avoid conflict. We avoid starting conflicts, Sarah corrected. Finishing them is another matter entirely. You have 10 minutes to begin withdrawal. After that, we demonstrate why it's a bad idea to hurt our friends. On Zerion Prime, Zektar watched in amazement as human ships engaged Vorthan forces above his world. The humans fought with a precision and ferocity that shocked both Cathera and Vorthon observers. They didn't just meet the enemy head-on, they used tactics the Vorthons had never encountered. How did you come so quickly? Zektar asked through his communicator. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger. We've been watching. When we saw the Vorthons massing for invasion, we prepared. 300 ships from 17 human worlds. Every captain volunteered when they heard the Cathera were in danger. The tide of battle was turning, but the cost would be enormous. Sarah looked at the tactical display and made the hardest decision of her military career. This wouldn't be just a rescue mission. It would be a statement to the galaxy that humanity protected its friends, no matter the cost. The human response. The emergency session of the Human Defense Council had lasted 18 hours. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the assembled leaders of humanity, her uniform crisp despite her exhaustion. Outside the windows of Luna Command, Earth hung like a blue jewel in the void, peaceful and unaware of the decision being made in its name. You're asking us to declare war on the most powerful military force in the galaxy, President Martinez said, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. The Vorthans have conquered 18 species. Their fleet outnumbers ours 10 to 1. I'm asking us to honor our values, Sarah replied. We claim to stand for life, for dignity, for the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. The Cathera trusted me 20 years ago. They saved my life when they had every reason to let me die. Now they're facing extinction. Defense Minister Kim leaned forward. Admiral, I've read your reports. I understand your personal connection to this species, but we cannot risk human civilization for one system. It's not one system, Sarah countered, activating the holographic display. 7 Kythera worlds are under attack. 2 have already been stripped of atmosphere. The Vorthons aren't conquering, they're exterminating. And if we let this happen, we'll be next. The room fell silent. Admiral Torres, Sarah's old mentor, spoke carefully. Explain that assessment, Admiral. The Vorthons don't coexist, they eliminate. Their expansion pattern shows they've been systematically destroying every species they encounter. They're 3 sectors away from human space. If they finish with the Kythera, we're next on their list. Sarah manipulated the display, showing projected Vorthon expansion routes. We can fight them now with Kythera allies, or we can fight them later, alone. The debate raged for hours. Some council members argued for diplomatic solutions. Others wanted to focus on human defense rather than alien rescue. But Sarah's data was compelling. The Vorthons had ignored every attempt at negotiation in their 3-century expansion. President Martinez called for a recess. As the council members filed out, he approached Sarah privately. 20 years ago, you violated first contact protocols to save alien children. Now you're asking humanity to risk everything for the same species. Why should we trust your judgment? Sarah met his eyes without flinching. Because, Mr. President, judgment based on compassion has never led humanity astray. Every great moment in our history came when we chose to help rather than hide. When the session resumed, Admiral Torres presented the military assessment. If we're going to do this, we need every available ship. I'm talking about pulling vessels from colony defense, trade route protection, and research missions. We'll be leaving human space virtually undefended. How many ships can we muster? Martinez asked. 300 if we strip everything. It would be the largest fleet humanity has ever assembled. Councilmember Zhang raised a critical point. Even with 300 ships, we're still outnumbered. How do we possibly win? Sarah stepped forward. The Vorthons have technology and numbers, but they've never fought humans before. They don't understand our tactics, our adaptability, or our willingness to sacrifice for others. They expect us to fight like every other species they've conquered. And how do we fight? Martinez asked. Sarah's smile was grim. We fight like humans. We use every dirty trick, every unconventional tactic, every advantage our enemies don't expect. The Vorthons have conquered 18 species by following predictable patterns. We're going to break every rule they think they know about warfare. The vote was close. 7 in favor, 5 against. Humanity would go to war. The mobilization that followed was unprecedented. Ships from every human world converged on the staging area at Wolf 359. Colony defense fleets, exploration vessels retrofitted with weapons, even civilian ships converted to medical frigates. Captain Zhang of the battleship Defiance summed up the fleet's mood. We're not just fighting for the Kythera, we're fighting for the idea that the strong should protect the weak. Sarah took command of the task force from her flagship, the Prometheus. As she reviewed the tactical data one final time, her communications officer reported incoming transmission from Zerion Prime. Zektar's voice was weak but determined. Sarah, friend, the young ones remember your stories. They know humans keep promises, but so many have already died. Can you truly help us? We're coming, old friend, Sarah replied. All of us. Every ship humanity can spare. As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Sarah addressed her captains one final time. We're about to prove something to the galaxy. We're going to show them that humanity doesn't just explore the stars. When necessary, we defend them. 300 human ships vanished into hyperspace, carrying with them the hopes of 2 species and the promise that some debts are worth any price to repay. Unconventional warfare. The first phase of the battle had been a disaster. Despite their determination, human ships were being systematically destroyed by superior Vorthon technology. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the tactical display with growing desperation as another human cruiser exploded under Vorthon plasma fire. Admiral, we've lost 12 ships in the first hour, reported Commander Parks. At this rate, we won't last another 3 hours. Sarah studied the battlefield, her mind racing through possibilities. The Vorthons were fighting exactly as expected. Massive formations, overwhelming firepower, textbook fleet tactics. They were winning because they were playing their game by their rules. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Protocol 7, break formation and scatter. Ma'am? Parks looked confused. That's not a fleet engagement protocol. Exactly. Sarah replied. Order all ships to planetary atmosphere. We're not fighting a fleet battle anymore. The Vorthan commander, General Krexvol, watched in confusion as the human ships abandoned traditional formation and dove towards Zerion Prime's surface. It was either a retreat or suicide. Pursue and destroy, he ordered. Drive them into the atmosphere if they wish. Our ships can fight in any environment. That was his first mistake. The Vorthans had conquered 18 species, but every one of those species had fought conventionally. None had experience with human creativity born from Earth's harsh environments. As Vorthan ships followed the humans into Zerion Prime's turbulent atmosphere, Sarah's true plan revealed itself. The human ships didn't fight like a fleet anymore. They fought like predators from Earth's oceans, mountains, and jungles. Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Tenacious led his ship into the planet's massive storm system. When Vorthon pursuers followed, they found themselves battered by winds that humans had learned to navigate during Earth's hurricane seasons. Rodriguez used the storm as cover, striking from the chaos and disappearing again. Captain Liu of the cruiser Indomitable took her ship into the deep canyons that scarred Zerion Prime's surface. The Vorthons followed, only to discover that humans had learned canyon fighting from Earth's mountain warfare. Liu's ship used the rocky walls as shields, bouncing shots off canyon faces and attacking from impossible angles. The Kythera watched in amazement as human ships fought like living creatures rather than machines. They used the planet itself as a weapon, turning Zerion Prime's hostile environment against the invaders. Zektar, coordinating ground resistance from his ancient caves, spoke to Sarah through the communication link. Your ships fight like desert hunters. They use the land itself. We learned from the best teachers, Sarah replied. Earth never made anything easy for us. Now we return the favor. The real genius of Sarah's strategy became clear when human ground forces began deploying. But these weren't traditional soldiers. They were specialists trained in Earth's most extreme environments, desert survival experts, jungle warfare veterans, Arctic operations teams, and deep-sea tactical units. They taught the Kythera new ways to fight. Sergeant Kim, a veteran of Earth's Amazon campaigns, showed Kythera warriors how to move silently through their own desert terrain. They had lived in these lands for generations, but had never learned to use them tactically. Lieutenant Foster, trained in Arctic warfare, taught the Kythera how to attack from the planet's polar regions, where the Vorthon's tropical world equipment functioned poorly. The cold didn't bother the desert-adapted Kythera, but it wreaked havoc on Vorthon technology. The Vorthons found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave predictably. Human ships would disappear into dust storms and emerge behind them. Ground forces would vanish into cave systems the Vorthons couldn't map and strike from unexpected directions. General Krexvol grew increasingly frustrated. How do we fight an enemy that won't stand still? They're using the planet against us. His tactical officer had no answers. The Vorthons had studied every species they'd conquered, but humans fought unlike anything in their databases. They adapted constantly, using every environmental advantage available. The turning point came when Sarah executed her most audacious plan. Instead of protecting the Kythera cities, she evacuated them into the deep cave systems where Zektar had once hidden her. Then she did something no military commander had ever attempted. She gave the planet back to the wilderness. Human engineers worked with Kythera knowledge to trigger massive sandstorms, flooding in the lowlands, and seismic instability in the mountains. They turned Zerion Prime into a weapon against the invaders. The Vorthans, accustomed to fighting on conquered worlds that had been tamed and civilized, found themselves battling a planet that seemed alive and hostile. Their equipment failed in the sandstorms, their supply lines were cut by flooding, their formations were broken by earthquakes. This is impossible, Krexvol raged. Planets don't fight back. This one does, Sarah replied over the communication channel, because we taught it how. The battle had become something unprecedented, a war where the environment itself was an active participant. The humans and Kythera weren't just fighting the Vorthans, they were teaching the planet to fight alongside them. As Vorthan losses mounted and their technology failed in the hostile conditions, some of their commanders began to understand what they were truly facing. This wasn't just another conquest. They were fighting a species that had learned to turn any environment into an ally. The question now was whether even the mighty Vorthian Dominion could adapt to an enemy that treated warfare as a conversation with the wilderness itself. The price of kindness. The final battle raged for 3 days across Zerion Prime's scarred surface. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of her flagship, watching as human and Kythera forces fought side by side against the remnants of the Vorthon invasion fleet. The unconventional tactics had worked beyond her wildest hopes. The Vorthons, masters of traditional warfare, found themselves completely outmatched by an enemy that refused to fight traditionally. Their massive fleet was reduced to scattered groups trying desperately to reach orbit and escape. But victory had come at a terrible cost. Nearly half the human fleet was destroyed or crippled. Thousands of young humans had died light years from home, fighting for a species most of Earth had never heard of. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," Lieutenant Morrison reported. "It's Elder Zektar." Sarah's heart clenched. Her old friend had insisted on fighting despite his advanced age. At over 90 years old, he was ancient by Kythera standards, but he had refused to hide while his people faced extinction. The main screen flickered to life, showing Zektar's weathered face. His scales were dulled with age, and fresh scars marked his neck, but his amber eyes still held the same gentle wisdom Sarah remembered. "Sarah, friend," he said, his voice weak but warm. "You kept your promise. You came when we needed you most." "I told you humans pay their debts," Sarah replied, fighting back tears. "How are you holding up down there?" Zektar's laugh was like wind through old stones. "I am dying, friend. The healers say perhaps hours, perhaps a day. But I die knowing my people will live." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on her. "You saved my life in a cave 20 years ago. Look what it led to." "No," Zektar corrected gently. "You saved mine first. When you shared your healing knowledge, when you cared for our young ones, you showed us that kindness could cross any boundary. That lesson saved us long before your ships arrived." Around them, the cleanup continued. Human medical ships worked alongside Kythera healers to treat the wounded. Engineering teams from both species collaborated to rebuild damaged cities. What had begun as a rescue mission was becoming the foundation of an alliance. On the bridge of his crippled flagship, General Krexval finally understood what he had been fighting. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet, they had revealed the fundamental flaw in Vorthan philosophy. The Dominion conquered through fear and overwhelming force, but they had never encountered an enemy motivated by love. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "the remaining human fleet is broadcasting terms for our surrender." Krexval read the terms with growing amazement. The humans weren't demanding reparations or territory. They wanted a simple promise. The Vorthons would leave Kythera space and never return. Survivors would be allowed to return to Dominion territory unharmed. "This is a trick," he muttered. "No one offers such generous terms to a defeated enemy." But Sarah's next transmission made her position clear. "General Krexval, we're not interested in conquest or revenge. We just want you gone. Take your surviving ships and leave. But understand this. Humanity will be watching. If the Dominion threatens any species under our protection, we'll be back." "Your protection?" Krexval found his voice. "You speak as if you're a great power. You have barely 300 ships." Sarah's smile was cold as space. "Today we had 300 ships. Tomorrow we might have 3,000. Humanity has a talent for rapid expansion when properly motivated. Test us again, and you'll find out just how motivated we can become." The Vorthon withdrawal took 2 days. As the last Dominion ships limped toward the hyperspace jump point, Sarah received word that Zektar had requested a final meeting. She found him in the same cave system where he had once saved her life. The old Kythera was surrounded by youngsters, the great-grandchildren of hatchlings whose lives Sarah had helped save decades earlier. They listened with wide eyes as he told the story of the human who had fallen from the sky. "Grandmother Sarah," one of the youngest said, using the Kythera term for respected elder, "will you tell us about Earth?" Sarah spent hours with them, sharing stories of humanity's homeworld, its diverse environments and cultures. As the day waned, the younger Kythera were called away by their parents, leaving Sarah alone with Zektar. "I have something for you," the old healer said, producing a small crystalline device. "It contains the genetic records of every Kythera child saved by your healing knowledge. Thousands of lives that exist because one human chose kindness over fear." Sarah accepted the crystal reverently. "Zektar, No words, friend. Some debts cannot be spoken, only lived." He settled back against the cave wall, looking frailer than ever. "Tell me about the stars. Are there others like us out there? Others who might need friends?" Sarah looked up at the cave opening, where alien stars twinkled in an unfamiliar pattern. "Yes, old friend, the galaxy is full of people who need friends, and now they know where to find them." As Zektar's breathing slowed, Sarah held his clawed hand just as she had 20 years before. This time, she was the one offering comfort to a dying friend. When the end came, it was peaceful, with Sarah's voice softly describing Earth's oceans and forests. The funeral for Elder Zektar drew representatives from across Kythera space. But it was Admiral Sarah Chen who delivered the final eulogy, speaking in fluent Kithara before a gathered crowd of thousands. He taught us that the greatest strength isn't in our weapons or our ships, she said. It's in our willingness to help those who cannot help themselves. Today the galaxy learned that lesson. Tomorrow, I hope, we'll all be better for it. As Sarah's ship prepared to leave Zerion Prime, she received a final transmission from the new Kithara leadership. They wanted to formalize an alliance with humanity. They offered technology, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. Sarah smiled as she dictated her response. Tell them that friendship is all the alliance we need, humans and Kithara, together among the stars. I think Zektar would have liked that. The human fleet departed Zerion Prime, but they left behind something more valuable than any treaty. The knowledge that in a galaxy full of predators, there were still those willing to stand between the strong and the weak. And in the caves of Zerion Prime, Kithara children would grow up hearing stories of the human who fell from the sky, the debt of kindness that spanned decades, and the day an entire species learned that the smallest act of compassion could reshape the fate of worlds.